Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Welcome, friends. Again, God bless you. And as always, thanks for sharing the podcast. We've got Gary Kah as our guest today. Man, I have been so incredibly blessed to be able to talk to all of the guests that I've been able to see through the last several months. It's just really been amazing here on Worldview Matters. But I want to bring him in. Gary is an author and researcher, and his parents, a little background on him. His parents came to America in the 1950s, and he still has relatives that live over in Germany and Croatia. But let's go back to the 1980s, and he can share a little bit more when he gets on the screen. He uncovered information regarding the printing of a new U.S. currency in the 80s. After some investigation, he found that many countries around the world had already begun issuing new currencies similar in design. So he discovered that this coordinated effort was merely a stepping stone to what we're seeing today, the move towards establishing a single global unit of exchange, which was to be part of the coming one world government, which is what we'll talk about today. Gary and his wife Audrey have been married for 40 years, and they live near Indianapolis, Indiana. He has a #1 book, Christian bestseller, called En Route to Global Occupation. Now, this is a message that's crucial to the spiritual and political future of the world. And since its release in 1992, it's sold over 250,000 copies, and he continues to encourage and inform and edify the body of Christ and believers around the world with the information and the great research he does. Welcome, Gary Kah, to Worldview Matters. Hi, brother. Good to see you.
Hi, David. Good to see you again. It's been a while.
Yes, it has. So I want to mention your website, GaryKah, KAH.org. Hope for the World. You guys can go and check that out and sign up for his articles. And he's got a news journal. So make sure to go to his website after the program here today, because we're going to just drive right through a lot of this. But first, because he is new to Worldview Matters, I mean, I've spoken to him for years, but this is the first time on this show. I want you, Gary, just to share a little bit about your background and how that brought you to doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, as you mentioned, my parents came over from Europe. My father fled from the communists in Croatia at age 12. And then less than a year later, he fled from the Nazis in Austria. He's got quite a story. My mother grew up under Hitler in Germany with a dad who was very outspoken against Hitler, to the point where he had to go into hiding when two secret police showed up looking for him in their small farm village. And so after the war, my parents got married. They came to the Dayton, Ohio area where I grew up. And so as I was a kid growing up at family gatherings, I hear about what they went through during the war. And so I became interested in international matters at a pretty early age. And then when I was about 11 years old, I accepted Jesus as my Savior. And it just seemed like at that time, my level of discernment jumped forward a bit, and the pieces came together. I realized that what my parents went through and what is going on in the world today, and Israel being reborn, and my interest in Bible prophecy took off. And so I wasn't your typical 11 or 12-year-old, because I actually watched the evening news with my dad. Back then, it was the Huntley-Brinkley Report, for any old-timers who might remember that news program. But that kind of set the stage. So many years later, God graciously opened up the door for me to work as the Europe and Middle East trade specialist for the government of Indiana. That was a position under the lieutenant governor in Indiana. The lieutenant governor is the director of commerce activities. And so it was a political position. And I had the wonderful opportunity to travel to 23 different countries on behalf of the Indiana government to increase our exports from the state. It was an economic development job intended to help create more jobs here in Indiana. And so I was on the payroll of the state government, but my meetings were set up and arranged through our embassies, which of course are under the State Department. So I got to know a lot of the people at the embassies in these 20 some countries that I travel to. And usually we'd spend 2 to 4 days together, working on projects and setting up meetings with international business leaders that then we would try to basically sell on Indiana, right? And through all of those experiences over those few years, something that I realized was that many people working for our State Department, and this was back in the 80s, had more of a globalist mindset. They had no problem with empowering the United Nations to the point of becoming a type of global government regime. And they were less inclined, really, toward defending our national sovereignty. And I asked a lot of questions. And, if you don't show your hand right away and just ask questions, it's amazing what people will tell you if they feel comfortable with you. And,
right.
Long story short, I discovered that many of these same people who were supportive of this more of a globalist view, a one world government view, they also were not very fond of Bible-believing Christians and Jews. Wow. And there was state hatred toward Israel. And I want to make clear, not all the people working at our embassies were coming from this point of view. I did meet some Christians, but they were few and far between. More recently, let me jump ahead real quick. We have had a close friend who worked in a key position at a U.S. embassy. And there may be, I'm guessing, 150 or so employees at that embassy. And he told us after several years of working there that only he and one other person were Christians and the U.S. ambassador that had been appointed by Trump. So 3 Christians that he knew of out of 150. And this is quite characteristic, unfortunately, within our State Department. So these people that are involved in helping to implement foreign policy and set foreign policy have been largely globalist for many, many years. So anyway, I caught on to that. It disturbed me, being a Christian myself and looking at what my parents had gone through, through World War II. And I remember back to a commitment I made when I was 11 years old. Sitting in my classroom in Kettering, Ohio, and going through our first history lesson that involved World War II, I remember praying to God, saying, if anything were to ever happen in this country, like what happened in Europe during World War II, I promise I will take a stand, no matter the cost. And so that all came back to me. And so I thought, okay, God, you've more or less dropped this information in my lap and put me in this position at a very young age. All my colleagues in other states, some of them were twice my age. And so I just thought that was strange right from the beginning, but it's as if I was on the fast track to learn these things so that I could do something with the information. And so as I prayed about it, God began opening doors. My best friend at the time was the right-hand assistant to Indiana's Secretary of State, who happened to be a Christian, and they had a Bible study that met in their office. And so one day my friend Mike asked me to come and share about some of these things that I had learned. And that was the beginning. Wow. Some state legislators were involved in that group, and they invited me to share at other groups, both political and religious in orientation. And the rest kind of is history. And eventually I left my job and spent 6 years doing further research and writing my book. And as you mentioned, that came out in 1992, 32 years ago, which is hard to believe. But everything that's happening now, I was trying to warn people about back then. But, back then it was all underneath the surface and behind the scenes. Today, it's much more out in the open.
Wow. Oh, so much in there, Gary. I want to mention a couple things you said, but I want to send people to your website if you want to check out the book, friends, en route to global occupation. It's GaryKah.org, and you can check out the store there, or it is available on Amazon if you want to check it out there. So, Gary, a couple takeaways. what I heard, and it might surprise a lot of people, that you're talking about the 1980s, and you mentioned it was clear there was anti-Semitism then, and three Christians out of 150 people working in the government. Did I hear that right?
Yes, you did. You did.
Wow.
And in fact, over the years, we've had a number of people from our U.S. embassies who are concerned about the direction of things funnel information my way, because they know full well if they spoke up about it, probably they'd get axed or worse. And so some of the things we know because of having very good people in key positions. And so we thank the Lord for that, but also puts an enormous responsibility on us to be responsible with the information that we do receive. But it is very serious. It shouldn't surprise us. If you read the Bible, we know the direction that things, are heading in these last days. But at the same time, seeing evil prosper to the degree that it does, and overall, a lot of lack of discernment among Christians, many of whom want to bury their heads in the sand, and it's understandable. Who wants to focus on this? But at the same time, Ephesians 5:11 tells us to expose the works of darkness and to have nothing to do with them. And so we need to know the Bible, but we also need to be aware of those things going on around us so that we can apply Scripture to the things that are happening in our everyday lives. It takes both. And that's in line with the example that Jesus set for us.
So we're going to take a very brief break, though. When we come back, I recently enjoyed your program when you were on Understanding the Times with Jan Markell. And what was that called? The End Game, the World as One. And that's the goal. That's what we've been hearing for so many years. But since COVID, I think BC, it was still in the works before COVID. But since COVID, we've seen the World Economic Forum and the globalists really push and take advantage of the government power and tyranny. But we're going to come back with Gary Kah and talk about Yuval Noah Harari and how they really see President Trump, if he were to be reelected, they really sincerely see him as a threat to globalism. More with Gary Kah when we come back on Worldview Matters.
Today's show is brought to you by Harbingers Daily. World news biblically understood. Stay informed at harbingersdaily.com.
Hey friends, if you're listening to our show via audio podcast, please help us out by leaving a 5-star review to help our show rise in the rankings. We really, really appreciate your reviews and comments. And also, it's growing fast, praise God. And we're looking for new sponsors. If you know somebody that would be interested, go to our website, worldviewmatters.tv, and send us an email if you're interested in sponsoring the show. Our guest today, Gary Kah, GaryKah.org. Hope for the world, a great balanced approach to the biblical worldview, to globalism, to Bible prophecy, to the website, on his website, what's happening today. I want to go right to what I teased before the break, and that is the globalists, Gary, really see Trump as a threat, and that's one of the reasons that the left, the media, the Democrat Party, the Marxists, and the globalists have pulled out all the stops in attacking him, their propaganda campaigns, lawsuits against him. It's really, we've seen things unheard of in American history. Share your thoughts basically on what Yuval Noah Harari said, and just what can we take away from this and what can we look out for?
Yeah, Harari has been a regular speaker at the World Economic Forum. He doesn't lack intelligence. He's very smart, brilliant mind. But what he does lack is discernment. He's helping to take the world in a very dark direction through transhumanism, artificial intelligence, a lot of things that he's promoting. He sees a completely different world than what we want to see in the next few years. Let's put it that way. Strongly favors world government, is on the same page with Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and George Soros and that whole crew with the World Economic Forum. And They all really they see Donald Trump as being a political figure that stands in the way here in the United States. Because to have a true global government, global society, you have to have the U.S. on board. Otherwise, it's not going to be a true global government with the influence that the U.S. exercises in the world. And so Trump has been defending our national sovereignty vehemently, and he has taken on the globalists and opposed them head to head. And so they can't stand the man. And I know a lot of Christians, and I myself, I've taken issue with some of the silly remarks that Trump makes sometimes. And sometimes you just wish he would just zip it up and know when to stop. But as far as policy goes, he has been the one who has opposed them strongly. And even if you're a skeptic of Trump, or even if you hate the guy, when you look at what they're trying to do to him, that speaks volumes. Mm-hmm. That should tell you that obviously he's on the other side from them, because they're coming at him with everything. I mean, this is unprecedented. How many trials has he gone through now? And the lawsuits, the millions of dollars. I mean, just in his defense, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I've heard that he's spent in excess of $30 or $40 million just defending himself, let alone any lawsuit fines that he may have to pay out, like the recently awarded, $80 million or what it was to that one lady. It's ridiculous. And they're going to keep going and keep going. They're going to try to wear him down and even try to get him arrested if possible, so that he cannot run this fall. So my concern is this. If they can, they'll keep him from running, and I don't think anybody else will stand up to the New World Order the way he is currently doing here in the United States. So there's that side of it. If Biden comes back in, or if it looks like he's going to lose and they bring somebody else in at the last moment, they're not going to oppose the one world agenda. If they get in the next 3 to 4 years, possibly within the next year, we're going to be living in a different country as quickly as things are going right now. Yeah. On the other hand, if Trump is able to run, and if he is able to get in, big ifs, because he's got a lot of things stacked against him. If he does get in, what is the left going to do as a result? They'll throw all the money, all the Soros money and any other money they have to foment uprisings in our big cities. And you're probably going to have an America that's on fire, burning, quite literally. So the way ahead, it's going to be a difficult course the rest of the way. And we shouldn't fool ourselves that it's going to be anything but that. It's going to be a battle. The longer we can hold out, the more time it gives us to warn people, to get the gospel message of Christ out, and to present our worldview, so at least a fair number of people aren't deceived by what is coming. I would say, speculating, that maybe 10% of the American people have a decent handle now on what is taking place. Maybe another 20% realize something is wrong, this is not right, and they're looking more into matters. And so that's way up from the 2 or 3%, maybe 15 years ago. And so people are waking up now. And so the clock is ticking for globalists. They realize they have a window of opportunity. And if they move fast enough, maybe they can pull all of this off. But if they let things drag out too long, then things are going to backfire on them. And so the next 12 months are extremely critical regarding this entire agenda.
What you said, oh my goodness, there's so much going on, and we've never seen this happen before ever to any American, let alone a president or a former president. But he said, man, if he wasn't already their enemy, when he said, I don't know what part of his presidency, when in a speech he said, America will never be a globalist nation. And man, if he didn't have a target on his back already, when he took that stand and made it clear to the country, that's where he stood, man, no wonder things have ramped up. And it's like demons were unleashed almost, Gary, because it's a spiritual battle at the core, right? And these demonic agendas, America is in the way. The biblical worldview is in the way. And We've been a target here in the States of the World Economic Forum, of the UN. So let me ask you this, Gary Kah, where do you think America is vulnerable? Does so much come down to this election in 2024? Are there other areas? I mean, look at our southern border, look at our national debt, the finances, the economy. Where else are we vulnerable?
First of all, that speech I think that you're talking about, he gave the best, most powerful speech in defense of our national sovereignty I've ever heard at the United Nations.
Yes.
If people can get a copy of that transcript, it was an outstanding speech.
Yep.
We're vulnerable on almost every front right now because the globalists are now holding the key positions in our government and behind the scenes. And it's much more difficult to get people out of their positions once they're in than it would be to prevent them from ever getting in the first place. That's why I wish people who are waking up now, I wish that would have happened 30 years ago when my book first came out. And that's what we try to do. We warn people, but people have been so slow to come around and wake up to what's going on. So that's been a problem. But now that people are waking up, what is perhaps the biggest concern to me, and what I'm told through good sources that keeps some of our good generals in the military up at night, is the possibility of an all-out cyber attack, or even worse, an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. Because if that occurred, whether it was something done from within by our own CIA, or from outside by Russia or China or Iran, whatever the case may be, if that happens, it would shut everything down. And there are ways that people can protect themselves now. In fact, there's even a device that you can secure your home and your cars from an EMP, and it's called EMPshield.com, I think is what it is. So people may want to look into that. But I'm not here to try to push any products or anything. I'm just saying things that we can do to protect ourselves, because this is a very real threat. And I think over the next 12 months, that kind of threat is going to be much higher than it has ever been. Yeah. And hopefully at some point it will subside, because I feel like the globalists are getting desperate. And if they have their backs to the wall and it looks like Trump's going to win, or maybe he does win, they still have a couple months after the election as well before the new administration comes in. And so who knows what they may try to do to stay in control. And so anything with a computer chip in it wouldn't work after an EMP if they set it off in the right spot and if it's powerful enough. So if you have an EMP go off, one of the more powerful type over, say, Omaha or Kansas City, it pretty much wipe out most of the country except maybe southern Florida, southern Texas, and northern Maine. I mean, it's mind-boggling what could happen. So I would encourage your listening audience to pray against that. Yes. Really, I believe that God can intervene and that he can keep that from taking place, because if that happened, it would change everything. We wouldn't be able to communicate the way we do now. People would be basically down to bicycles and whatever food they have in their house or that they could grow. And so I don't want to be overly negative on this, but I am telling you this is a very real possibility that we need to pray into. So that would be the first vulnerability. Along with that, just the general deception of the one world movement. They're using the environmental agenda. Back in the 1980s, as you know, I was in an organization called the World Constitution and Parliament Association that I had been invited to join. They were already mapping out a global system back then, and they put out a list of 49 reasons for why we need a world government. This was only intended for members at the time, and I had been invited to join this organization. So for 4 years, I received their documents and their letters, and of their 49 reasons that they sent out to their members, about almost a third of them had to do with the environment. So I knew way back in the 80s that the environment, global warming, climate change, and they used all those terms already back then. Wow. But it didn't begin to go public until 1992 at the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit. And then gradually this whole movement has grown. And their argument is that the world's falling apart And if we don't do something, if we don't have a world government to solve this problem, it's going to be irreversible. And so Al Gore came out somewhere back then and said that the world's oceans would go up something like 30 feet by 2030 or something like that. And, the mass media just puts him on this pedestal. I saw one interview recently. They interviewed Al Gore and they said, how could you have gotten things so right 30 years ago? And I thought, you should be saying the opposite. The oceans have come up, 4 to 6 inches? He was saying 30 feet. He's been way off target on everything he said, but yet they're making him look like some kind of a hero. So anyway, back in 1992 at the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit, you had Prince Charles, back then now King Charles, Mikhail Gorbachev, Stephen Rockefeller, Maurice Strong of Canada, Al Gore, and a few others that began promoting this globalist environmental agenda. And it has just grown since then. And so the World Economic Forum, the number one thing at their platform in these other globalist meetings, and we haven't even begun to talk about them. There's been 3 of them in the last 2 months and 2 more big ones coming up later this year. What they talk about the most is the environment, because they want to use legislation that they want to pass in the name of the environment to save the earth. And they hope that people will buy into it. And unfortunately, many, many people are. In fact, your 35 and under crowd, about 70% are supporting this agenda. And it's a far left, one world agenda. And so we're very vulnerable in that area as well.
That's good marketing, and it starts in the K through 12 government-run education system, and it continues at the uber Marxist university level. But Gary, I was going to ask you, we ran out of time, but I was going to ask you what's the church's role, because we shouldn't panic, but yet we've got to be discerning. To be continued, brother. Thank you so much for your time today. GaryKah.org. I thank you for your research, your expertise, and what you had to share today. And I know a lot of people were blessed. God bless you, brother.
Thank you, David. God bless you.
Well, Lord willing, we'll see you soon. All right, guys, thanks again for sharing the podcast, and God bless you. As always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.